Okay, so we're going to take a look at how I did when I faced 3-bet in my sample. As you can see, I ended up losing at about 66 BB per 100. And you're instantly maybe, man, Doug, you sucked when you got 3-bet. But that's because that's the way that it works. When you open with about 80% of hands and your opponent 3-bets you with about 20% of hands, that range is much stronger and you've already put money in the pot. So you will lose money when you open and get 3-bet, period. The way you have to play is anytime I can lose less than minus 250, then I want to take that opportunity. Now, one thing that I will say that I've noticed in my sample is that my bluffs tended to go worse than if I had folded. But I still think that they're important to the strategy because if you don't have bluffs, your opponent can counter you by folding a lot to your 4-bets. So we can look through and look at some of my different 4-bets, see how they did, how they didn't do. But I just want you guys to know that I think from the analysis I've done before, those hands lost more than folding pre-flop. Okay, so for starters, let's take a look at the value 4-bets. I mean, we could put in these hands for the lulls, but let's just look at some of the thinnest 4-bets. So these did well, but again, very small sample because I mainly did not 4-bet them. So when I do 4-bet those hands, they are going to be up against very loose players. Ace King, crushing, very small samples though, so you can't take too much here. Kind of have to take it with a grain of salt. Okay, let's look at our 4-bet bluffs. I'll start off with the Ace X is because I think that these ended up going much worse than you might imagine. Actually, you know what? These ended up being okay. So if you 4-bet these, if you fold these, you lose about 250. They lost at 188, so a little bit better than fold, which is just about where you want them to be. Now let's look at call. This has always gone so badly for me. 323. So, you know, I mean, this kind of furthers my argument about how I feel about these hands. As you can see from my fold by street, they end up in a lot of call, flop, fold, turn. Because if you don't flop an ace, it kind of ends up like that. And if you do call, flop, and turn, you're going to end up calling down a lot because you have an ace. So that kind of sucks. Your hand's kind of obvious. You have other hands to bluff with that are better bluffs. I'm not a big fan of these hands as calls. I'm just not. You're going to have to call them for some people. Because like even though this says minus 329, it just means that on average they lost. I'm sure the best like 30% of spots to call them won. You know, they won more than sorry, when I say won, I mean they won more than minus 250. But on average, when I took these calls, I lost money with them. So I'm not totally sure why everyone does it. I don't understand. Another thing, a little misconception I just want to clear up. I think most people in the know nowadays, well, pretty much everyone knows this, but for a long time in Heads Up No Limit, people believed that you had to 4-bet jam over 3-bet with low pairs because you just can't call. I remember people telling me that in 2010. And I was just like, that is just the most ridiculous. Because these hands actually crush as calls. So, and again, these are small samples, but they're still indicative of larger trends. Let's take a look at some other hands. Let's look at some of these weak offsuit Broadways and some of these hands. I'm not too thrilled with these guys in general. Minus 163, so that's pretty good. But maybe let's make them a little bit weaker. Let's take out the Broadways. I know I might be going through a lot of information pretty fast, but if you ever want to just pause it, go back, look at the different hands I'm isolating. I'm just looking at my sample, looking at how things did, just to give you a little database analysis for how I came to some of these conclusions. And these actually performed better. Okay. I assume it was because I was calling them in spots where it was good to call, which is kind of why this sample ends up getting kind of biased. Of these weak ones. All right, so those actually performed quite well in the database. Maybe you might want to be a little bit more aggressive with calling those hands. Although, again, I assume it's because when I did call them, it was in spots that it was much better to call them. Anyway, so these suited hands, let's look at the weak suited calls, first 3-bet. He's just lost at 22. Like, it's kind of amazing that this range of hands, like our weakest suited hands. I mean, there's some reasonably strong suited hands in here. These performed so well. If you want to take a loose flop versus 3-bet, it's got to be suited, guys. Just got to be suited. All right, so that should be some good basis for why I call those hands. Let's look at some more 4-bets. Let's look at these suited hands as 4-bets. I don't love them as 4-bets by any stretch of the imagination, but the thing is, they balance the range out nicely. It's good to have some flushes. It's good to have some low hands. I'll just look at all these, I guess. All right, we're looking at 163 hands now, so I don't want to get too carried away on what we are looking at. Let's do this, though. Let's take out all the value 4-bets. I don't know why some of those would be in there. Let's just take these out and look at the total value of bluff 4-betting the sample. So yeah, as you can see, I lost at 416 instead of 250, so these ended up slightly losing. You could make an argument based almost off of that it should be a little bit tighter of a range. But again, 1,500 hands, not too much to take away from that. But it's tough to 4-bet nowadays and heads up no limit as a bluff. You just end up facing a lot of action. A lot of guys that jam on you. So yeah, be careful. You know, if you ever want to tighten it up, I can totally get behind that. You got to pick your spots wisely. Always try to be majority value. If you're majority value, the thing is, even though these do slightly lose, you might win back more than this win rate on your good hands because of your 4-bet frequency, you know? Because, like, let's say that those lose you 1.6 BB every time you do it, okay? Not good. But if you get jammed on with these good hands more often, you know, that might be great. So, some give and some take, but I'm happy with my overall strategy here. All right, let's look at some more call 3-bets, I think. Now, we looked at a sizable amount of those. I think, is there anything else that I really want to look at? We know a lot of these are going to be winning or losing. We talked about the ace X's, talked about the weak suited. Okay, I think that's about going to wrap it up. I like to take my sample and break it down, show you some numbers. I'm a big numbers guy. I like to see how things go. Even in smaller samples, it can be indicative of good strategies, shows you greater trends. And we're going to continue to do this in basically every spot. Now, you know, this is over a few years of me playing, so obviously my strategies have changed. Obviously, sometimes strategies were better or worse back in the day, but it's still good to just work with that raw data in support, or maybe even going against things I've done in the past. I'm sure as we break down more stuff as we go along that we're going to come to some subjects where I made some mistakes, particularly when we get to post flop. We'll probably find some spots that I could have played better because I am not a perfect player by any stretch of the imagination, but I do want to give you guys that analysis using data.